Clara Whitmore dropped her suitcase on the train platform and watched her last hope pull away without her. 23 cents. That's what stood between her and the rest of her life. The ticket east had been refused. The banker's wife had made sure of that. Behind her, 3 women whispered the word that had followed her for 4 years. Barren. But Clara didn't cry. She turned around, looked every single one of them in the eye, and said something that shut the whole town down. If you want to hear what she said, subscribe to our channel, follow this story to the very end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see just how far Clara's story has traveled. The summer of 1879 came to Red Hollow, Montana, like a punishment nobody asked for. Heat pressed down on the valley without mercy. Dust rose from the road in slow yellow clouds that stuck to everything: skin, clothes, lungs. The creek south of town had dropped 3 feet in 2 weeks, and cattle ranchers were already counting losses they hadn't suffered yet. But none of that mattered to Clara Whitmore. She stood at the edge of the train platform with her suitcase at her feet, and her fingers wrapped around a ticket stub that no longer meant anything. The eastbound train had just pulled away, without her. She didn't move. Behind her, Margaret Harwell, the banker's wife, folded her parasol and whispered to 2 women standing beside the general store. "That's her, the Whitmore widow." 4 years married, the second woman said. Not a single child. "Barren," Margaret said, not a whisper anymore. Loud enough for Clara to hear. Loud enough for everyone to hear. A woman who can't give life has no business expecting a future in this town. Clara's hand tightened around the ticket stub until the paper crumpled. She turned slowly. The 3 women stiffened. Clara looked directly at Margaret Harwell. "I am not livestock, Mrs. Harwell." Silence. Not the polite kind. The kind that lands like a slap. Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it. Clara picked up her suitcase and walked past them without another word. Her boots hit the wooden planks steady and deliberate. Her chin stayed level. Her eyes didn't drop. But inside, her chest was collapsing. 23 cents. No ticket. No family. No home to go back to. Her husband James had died of typhoid 11 months ago, and the house, his house, always his house, had been sold by his brother before the funeral flowers dried. She had nothing, and now, not even a way out. She stopped at the end of the platform, set her suitcase down, and stared out at the empty road ahead. Dust swirled in the heat. The sun pressed against her black widow's dress like a branding iron. She didn't know where she was going. That's when she heard him. "Ma'am?" The voice came from the shade of the general store porch. Clara didn't turn right away. She'd heard enough voices today, all of them cruel, all of them measuring her worth by what her body hadn't produced. "Ma'am, you dropped this." She turned. A tall man stood at the edge of the porch, holding out a folded piece of paper. He wore a dust-covered hat, a work shirt rolled to the elbows, and boots that had seen more miles than most men see in a lifetime. Ethan Callahan. She knew the name. Everyone in Red Hollow knew the name. Widower, 2 children, owned the largest independent water rights in the valley. His wife, Mary, had died of fever 2 summers ago, and he hadn't spoken more than 6 words to any woman in town since. Clara looked at the paper in his hand. It wasn't hers. "That's not mine," she said. "I know," he said. He didn't smile. His face was weathered, serious, carved by grief and sun in equal measure. He stepped down from the porch. "I heard what Margaret said to you." Half the town heard, and the other half was thinking it. Clara stiffened. "If you've come to add to it, I haven't." He put the paper back in his pocket. "I came to say something else." She waited. He removed his hat, held it against his chest. That gesture alone, hat off, eyes level, voice low, carried more respect than anything Clara had received in months. "You need a home," he said. Clara didn't move. "My children need a mother." Her breath caught. "And I need someone strong enough to stand on my porch and not break when this valley tries to crush her." The three women behind them gasped. Margaret Harwell grabbed the arm of the woman beside her. Is he proposing to the barren widow?" Clara heard it. So did Ethan. He didn't look back. "I ain't offering pity," he said quietly. "I'm offering partnership." Clara studied his face. Hard lines, honest eyes. No charm, no performance. Just a man standing in the heat, holding his hat like it was the last decent thing he owned. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you just told the most powerful woman in this town that you ain't livestock. That takes guts." He paused. "My kids don't need softness, ma'am. They need guts." Clara felt something shift. Not hope. Not yet. Something older than hope. Something closer to defiance. "I have conditions," she said. "Name them." "Legal vows, not just words." "Agreed." "Equal authority in household decisions." He nodded slowly. "That's fair." "And a written clause. If anything happens to you, the land protection extends to me and the children. Not your brother, not the bank. Me." Ethan's jaw tightened. Not in anger, in surprise. "You've thought about this before," he said. "I've thought about survival every day for 11 months, Mr. Callahan. Thinking is all I've had." He put his hat back on. "Then we ride to the courthouse before sundown." Clara picked up her suitcase. "Before sundown," she repeated. They didn't shake hands. They didn't smile. They walked side by side down the main road of Red Hollow, while Margaret Harwell and every woman on that platform watched in disbelief. The banker's wife turned to her companion. "That marriage won't last the summer." The courthouse clerk was a thin man named Arvin Polk, who smelled like ink and whiskey and had married more people out of desperation than love. He looked at Clara, then at Ethan, then back at Clara. "You sure about this?" he asked. "We're sure," Ethan said. "Both of you?" Clara stepped forward. "Write it up, Mr. Polk." Arvin scratched the back of his neck. "I'll need 2 witnesses." "I'll stand." The voice came from the doorway. Doc Ellsworth, the town physician, walked in with his bag over his shoulder and a look on his face that said he'd already heard everything. "I'll witness," he said, "and I'll keep my opinions to myself, which is more than most folks in this town can manage." Ethan nodded. "Who's the second?" Arvin asked. Silence. Then a chair scraped against the floor in the corner. An old woman stood up. Agnes Whitfield, 81 years old, had buried 3 husbands and outlived every rumor this town ever threw at her. "I'll witness," Agnes said, "and if Margaret Harwell has a problem with it, she can take it up with the Lord directly." Clara almost smiled. The vows were quick, plain. No flowers, no music, no promises of eternal devotion. Just 2 people standing in a dusty courthouse, agreeing to try. When it was done, Arvin stamped the paper and slid it across the desk. "Congratulations, I suppose." Ethan folded the marriage certificate and put it in his vest pocket. "Much obliged." Clara walked out first. The sunlight hit her face, and for the first time in 11 months, she wasn't walking toward nothing. She was walking toward something. She just didn't know yet if that something would save her or break her worse than before. The ride to the Callahan ranch took 40 minutes. Ethan drove the wagon. Clara sat beside him with her suitcase between her boots. Neither spoke for the first 20 minutes. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "Tell me about them." Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "Hannah's 12. She runs the house. Has since her mother passed. Cooks, cleans, keeps Caleb in line. Doesn't trust anyone new." "And Caleb?" "6. He's fragile. Has nightmares most nights. Sweats through his sheets. Wakes up screaming for his mama." Clara's hands tightened in her lap. "He won't understand this," she said. "No, but he'll understand someone being there when he wakes up." "And Hannah?" Ethan's jaw set. "Hannah's going to fight you." "I expected that." "She'll test you, push you, say things meant to cut." "I've been cut before, Mr. Callahan." He glanced at her. "Ethan." "Ethan," she repeated. It felt strange, formal and familiar at the same time. "She's not cruel," he said quietly. "She's scared. Losing her mother ripped something out of her that hasn't grown back. I won't try to replace her mother." "Good, because she won't let you." The wagon crested a low ridge, and below them, the ranch spread out across the valley floor. A wood frame house, a barn, a corral with maybe 60 head of cattle pressed together near the creek bed, searching for water that was barely there. "Drought's been hard," Ethan said. "Lost 12 head last month. Creek's dropping an inch a day. How long can you hold? If rain comes by August, we survive. If it doesn't..." He didn't finish. Clara looked at the house. 2 figures stood on the porch. The tall one, Hannah, stood with her arms crossed and her chin up, guarding the front door like she owned it. The small one, Caleb, hid behind his sister's leg, peering out with wide, dark eyes. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop. "Hannah! Caleb! Come here!" Hannah didn't move. Caleb tugged at her sleeve. She shook him off. "Who is she?" Hannah called from the porch. Her voice was sharp, direct. 12 years old and already carrying the weight of a woman 3 times her age. "Her name is Clara," Ethan said. "She's my wife." The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Hannah's arms tightened across her chest. "Since when?" "Since about an hour ago." "You didn't ask us." "No, I didn't." "Mama's only been gone 2 years." "I know exactly how long your mom has been gone, Hannah." The girl's eyes moved to Clara, hard, measuring, looking for weakness the way a wounded animal looks for threat. Clara stepped down from the wagon. She didn't rush forward, didn't smile too wide, didn't crouch down to Caleb's level the way people do when they're trying too hard with children. She just stood there. "I'm not here to replace anyone," Clara said. "I'm here because your father asked, and I said yes." "Why?" Hannah demanded. "Because I needed somewhere to go, and he needed help." "We don't need help." "Then I'll stay out of your way until you decide otherwise." Hannah stared at her for a long moment. Then she turned and walked inside. The screen door slammed behind her. Caleb stood alone on the porch. His lower lip trembled. He looked up at Clara. "Are you nice?" he whispered. Clara knelt down. Not too close, just close enough. "I try to be. My mama was nice. I'm sure she was. She died. I know. I'm sorry. Are you gonna die?" Clara's throat tightened. "Not today," she said. Caleb thought about that. Then he reached out and touched her sleeve. Just barely. Just the fabric between her wrist and her elbow. "Okay," he said. Then he turned and ran inside after his sister. Ethan stood by the wagon, watching. He hadn't moved. Clara straightened up. "That went better than I expected," she said. "That was the easy one," Ethan replied. Night fell hot and heavy over the Callahan ranch. Clara sat at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. Caleb had gone to bed without supper. Hannah's doing, Clara suspected, though she didn't push. Ethan sat across from her, a cup of black coffee growing cold between his hands. "She won't come around quick," he said. "I know. Could be weeks. Could be longer." He looked at her. "You're patient." "I'm stubborn. There's a difference." The corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. "Guest room's at the end of the hall," he said. "Clean sheets, door locks from inside." "Thank you." "I want to be clear about something," he said. "This arrangement, it's what we said it was. Partnership. Nothing more unless both of us decide otherwise." "Understood." "I won't come to your door." "I wouldn't open it if you did." This time he did smile. Small, brief, gone almost before it arrived. "You're going to do fine here, Clara." She picked up her coffee cup. "Don't jinx it." She walked down the hallway, past Hannah's door, closed, no light underneath. Past Caleb's door, cracked open, the sound of restless breathing. She stopped. Through the crack, she could see Caleb tangled in his sheets, his small body twitching. His lips were moving. No sound yet, but the nightmare was building. Clara stood there. Every instinct told her to go in, to sit beside him, to smooth his hair and whisper that he was safe. But she wasn't his mother. She'd been in this house less than 4 hours. She had no right. She took one step back. Then Caleb whimpered. "Mama." Clara closed her eyes. She pushed the door open quietly and sat on the edge of his bed. She didn't touch him. She just sat there, breathing slow and steady, letting her presence fill the space. After a minute, his breathing eased. His fists unclenched. His body settled. He didn't wake up. Clara sat there for a long time. The heat pressed through the window. Crickets screamed outside. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called across the empty valley. She whispered, so quietly that not even the boy could hear. "I'm here." Down the hall, a floorboard creaked. Clara turned. Hannah stood in the darkness, watching, her face unreadable. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Then Hannah turned and walked back to her room. The door clicked shut. Clara turned back to Caleb. His breathing was even now, peaceful. She stood up, walked to the guest room, closed the door. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands against her face. For the first time in 11 months, Clara Whitmore didn't feel like she was disappearing. She felt like she had just made the most dangerous decision of her life. And she had absolutely no idea if she was strong enough to survive it. Clara woke before dawn to the sound of pots banging in the kitchen. She lay still for a moment, listening. The banging wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, rhythmic. A 12-year-old girl making a point. Clara got dressed, pulled her hair back, and walked down the hall. Hannah stood at the stove cracking eggs into a skillet with the precision of someone who'd been doing it since she was 10. She didn't look up when Clara entered. "Morning," Clara said. Nothing. "Can I help with anything?" "No." Clara pulled out a chair and sat at the table. She didn't push. She didn't offer again. She just sat there, hands folded, watching Hannah work. After a minute, Hannah spoke without turning. My mama used to make biscuits on Tuesdays. Today's Tuesday, Clara said. I know what day it is. Silence. I don't make biscuits, Hannah added. I don't know how. Clara heard it. Not the words, the space underneath them. A girl who'd memorized her dead mother's routines, but couldn't replicate them. A girl who kept a calendar of grief in her head and punished herself every time she fell short. I could show you, Clara said carefully. If you wanted. Hannah's shoulders tightened. She scraped the eggs onto a plate and set it on the table with enough force to rattle the fork. I didn't say I wanted. Okay. Ethan came in through the back door, hat already on, sweat already forming at his collar. He looked at Hannah, then at Clara, then at the plate of eggs between them. Morning, he said. She's sitting in Mama's chair, Hannah said flatly. Ethan paused. Clara looked down. She hadn't known. The chair she'd chosen, the one closest to the window, had been Mary Callahan's chair. She stood up immediately and moved to the opposite side of the table. I'm sorry, Clara said. I didn't know. Hannah stared at her, waiting for something, an excuse, a defense, a justification. Clara gave her none. Won't happen again, Clara said quietly. Something flickered across Hannah's face. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. She wasn't used to adults who backed down without a fight. Ethan sat down and picked up his fork. Clara, I need to ride out to the north pasture. Creek bed's drying faster than I thought. I'll be back by midday. What do you need from me? Keep the house. Keep the children close. Caleb's got a habit of wandering toward the creek when it gets hot. I'll watch him. Ethan nodded and ate in silence. When he finished, he stood, put his hat on, and walked to the door. He stopped. Hannah. What? Be decent. He didn't wait for an answer. The door closed behind him, and the sound of hooves faded down the road. Hannah turned back to the stove and began washing the skillet. Her movements were sharp, controlled, furious. Clara stayed at the table. You wash dishes like you're angry at them, Clara said. Maybe I am. Fair enough. The kitchen fell quiet except for the sound of water and iron. Then Caleb appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, his nightshirt damp with sweat. I'm hungry, he whispered. Hannah dried her hands. I'll make you something. I want what Mama used to make. Hannah froze. The skillet in her hand trembled. Clara watched the girl's face crack. Just for a second. Just a flash of raw grief before the wall rebuilt itself. Sit down, Caleb, Hannah said. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. I'll make eggs. I don't want eggs. I want Mama's. Sit down. Caleb's lip trembled. He climbed into a chair and stared at the table. Clara reached across and touched his hand. Just barely. Just enough. What did your mama make? She asked softly. Pancakes, Caleb said, with sugar on top. She said sugar was medicine for bad dreams. Clara smiled. She sounds like a smart woman. She was the smartest. Then let's make pancakes. Hannah spun around. You don't get to do that. Clara met her eyes. Do what? Act like you're her. Cook her food. Sit in her kitchen. Touch her son. The words hit like stones. Clara absorbed them without flinching. I'm not acting like anyone, Clara said. Your brother is hungry and he wants pancakes. That's all this is. That's not all this is, and you know it. Clara stood up slowly. Hannah, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But I'm not your enemy. You're not my anything. You're right, I'm not. But I'm here, and I'm not leaving, and your brother is hungry. So either you make the pancakes, or I do. Your choice." Hannah's jaw clenched. Then she grabbed the flour from the shelf and slammed it on the counter. "I'll do it," she said through her teeth. "Okay." Clara sat back down. Caleb looked between them, confused but too young to name what he was feeling. Under the table, Clara's hands were shaking. The pancakes were lumpy and slightly burned. Caleb ate 3 of them and declared them perfect. Hannah ate nothing. Clara ate 1 and said thank you. Nobody spoke about Mary Callahan again that morning. By midday, the heat had become unbearable. Clara found Caleb sitting on the porch steps, staring at the dry creek bed that snaked along the eastern property line. "Papa says the cows are thirsty," Caleb said. "They are." "Are they going to die?" "Your papa's working on that." "Mama said the creek used to be big enough to swim in." "I believe it." "Now it's just mud." Clara sat beside him, not too close. She was learning the distances in this family. The inches that meant safety, the feet that meant rejection. "Caleb, your papa told me you sometimes walk toward the creek when it gets hot." "I like the mud. It's cool on my feet." "I need you to stay where I can see you. Can you do that?" He looked at her with those wide, unguarded eyes. "Are you in charge now?" "I'm in charge of keeping you safe. That's my job." "Hannah says you're just temporary." Clara's chest tightened. "Is that what she said?" "She said Papa married you because he was desperate, and you'll leave before winter." Clara looked out at the empty road, the dust, the heat rising in waves off the parched earth. "Well," she said, "winter's a long way off." "That's not a real answer." She looked at him. 6 years old and already too smart for comfortable lies. "You're right," she said. "It's not. Here's a real one. I don't plan on leaving." "Promise?" "I don't make promises I'm not sure I can keep. But I plan on staying. That's the best I've got." Caleb thought about this for a long time. Then he nodded. "Okay. Can I go find bugs?" "Where I can see you." He jumped off the porch and ran toward the fence line, his nightmares forgotten in the simple mercy of being 6 years old in summer. Clara watched him go, and for the first time since arriving, she allowed herself to breathe. The breathing didn't last long. Ethan came back from the north pasture at 1:30. He didn't come alone. A second rider pulled up behind him. A man on a gray horse, broad-shouldered, well-dressed for the territory, clean vest, polished boots, a hat that hadn't seen real work in years. Silas Boone. Clara recognized the name before the face. Everyone in Red Hollow knew Silas Boone. He owned the Double B Ranch to the south, 3 times the size of Ethan's land, twice the cattle, and the only man in the valley who'd been trying to buy Ethan's water rights for the past 5 years. Ethan dismounted. His face was tight. Whatever had happened on the ride back, it wasn't friendly. Boone stayed mounted. He looked at the house, then at Clara on the porch. "So it's true," Boone said. He tipped his hat. "Mrs. Callahan, heard you got hitched yesterday." "Word travels fast," Clara said. "In Red Hollow? Only thing that moves faster than gossip is drought." He smiled. "Welcome to the family, so to speak." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." He turned back to Ethan. "Think about what I said, Callahan. That creek ain't coming back this summer. My offer's more than fair." Ethan unhitched his horse. "Your offer's an insult, and you know it. 40 cents an acre for water rights that'll be worthless by August? That's generous." "Get off my land, Silas." Boone clicked his tongue. His horse shifted. He looked at Clara one more time. "Ma'am, You seem like a sensible woman. Maybe you can talk some sense into your husband before this drought talks sense into all of us." "Mr. Boone," Clara said, "I've been married less than a day. I don't need your advice on how to manage my household." Boone's smile thinned. "Household," he repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" He turned his horse and rode back down the road. Dust rose behind him in a long, thin trail. Ethan stood by the corral, his hands gripping the fence rail. Clara walked down from the porch. "How bad is it?" she asked. "North pasture's almost dry. Creek's down to a trickle." "And his offer?" "He wants to buy my water rights. Same thing he's wanted for 5 years. Only now he's using the drought to squeeze." "What happens if you sell?" "We lose the ranch inside 2 years. Can't run cattle without water. He knows that." "And if you don't sell?" Ethan pulled off his hat and wiped his forehead. "If rain doesn't come by August, I lose the cattle anyway. Either way, he wins." Clara stared at the dust cloud, still hanging where Boone had ridden. "There's always a third option," she said. "Like what?" "I don't know yet. But I didn't survive the last 11 months by choosing between 2 bad answers." Ethan looked at her. Really looked at her, for the first time since the courthouse. "You're something, Clara Whitmore." "Clara Callahan," she corrected. He blinked, then nodded slowly. "Clara Callahan," he repeated. And the way he said it, quiet, almost reverent, made something shift between them that neither of them was ready to name. The first Sunday came fast. Ethan hitched the wagon, and the 4 of them rode to town for church. Clara wore her black dress, the only one she owned. Hannah sat in the back with Caleb, arms crossed, staring straight ahead like she was riding to her own execution. The church at Red Hollow was small, white clapboard, a bell tower that hadn't worked in 3 years. Inside, the pews were filled with ranchers' wives, shopkeepers, and their children. Every head turned when Ethan walked in with Clara beside him. Margaret Harwell sat in the 3rd row. She nudged her husband. He looked up, looked at Clara, looked back down at his hymnal. Reverend Calloway stood at the pulpit. "Welcome, everyone. I see we have a new member of our congregation." All eyes on Clara. She sat straight, hands in her lap, chin level. "Mrs. Callahan," the Reverend said with a careful smile. "Welcome." "Thank you, Reverend." The service proceeded. Prayers, hymns, a sermon about the drought and God's will and patience. But the real sermon happened afterward. Outside, under the church elm, the women gathered the way they always did. Clara walked toward the group, not expecting welcome, but refusing to hide. Margaret Harwell stepped forward. "Mrs. Callahan, how lovely to see you settled." "Thank you, Mrs. Harwell. I must say, it's remarkable. One day without a penny, the next day married to the biggest water rights holder in the valley." Margaret turned to the other women. "Quite the turnaround." "It was quite the day," Clara said evenly. "Tell me," Margaret said, lowering her voice just enough to sharpen the blade. "Does Mr. Callahan know about your condition?" Clara went still. "My condition?" "Well, dear, 4 years married to James Whitmore, not a single child. Surely that's something a man with 2 motherless children ought to know about before making commitments." The women around them went quiet, watching, waiting. Clara felt the heat rise from her chest to her throat. She felt 11 months of grief and humiliation pressing against her ribs like a fist. She wanted to scream. She wanted to grab Margaret Harwell by the collar of her fine linen dress and ask her what she knew about loss, about being measured by what your body refused to give. But she didn't. She stepped closer to Margaret. close enough that only the two of them could hear. "Mrs. Harwell, my husband knows exactly who he married. The question is whether you know who you're speaking to." Margaret's smile faltered. "Because I am no longer a woman with 23 cents and nowhere to go," Clara continued. "I am Clara Callahan. And if you want to discuss my body in public again, I suggest you be prepared for me to discuss your husband's debts just as loudly." Margaret's face drained of color. Clara stepped back, smiled politely, and turned away. Behind her, she heard a single, sharp intake of breath from the entire group. She walked to the wagon where Ethan was loading Caleb onto the seat. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." He looked at her face, then at the cluster of women behind her, still frozen under the elm. "What happened?" "Nothing that won't happen again," Clara said. She climbed onto the wagon. "Let's go home." He didn't press. They rode in silence for a mile before Hannah spoke from the back. "What did you say to Mrs. Harwell?" Clara glanced back. "Why?" "Because she looked like she swallowed a wasp." Clara faced forward again. "Good," she said. Hannah made a sound, almost a laugh. Almost. She caught herself and pressed her lips together, but Clara heard it, and something warm sparked in her chest. That night, Clara sat on the porch after the children went to bed. Ethan brought 2 cups of coffee and sat in the chair beside her. "Boone came by the south fence today while we were at church," he said. Clara's hand tightened around her cup. "He left his mark, cut 3 posts, and dragged them into the road." "Sabotage?" "Can't prove it. Could have been the wind, could have been cattle. But I know Boone's work when I see it." "Has he done this before?" "Twice. Last year he blocked our irrigation gate. Year before that, he filed a boundary dispute that cost me 4 months and $200. "And the law?" "Sheriff Morris plays cards at Boone's ranch every Thursday night. What do you think?" Clara set her coffee down. "So he wants the water rights. He can't buy them, so he'll pressure you until you sell or until the drought kills the ranch for him." "That's the shape of it." "What about the territorial judge?" Ethan shook his head. "Judge comes through twice a year. Next session isn't until September." "September might be too late." "I know." They sat in the darkness. Crickets screaming, heat pressing, stars burning overhead in a sky that refused to send rain. "Ethan?" "Yeah, that irrigation gate he blocked last year. Did you file a complaint? Wrote a letter to the territorial office. Did you get a response?" "Form letter. Said they'd investigate." "Did they?" "What do you think?" Clara's mind was turning, fast, the same way it had turned 11 months ago when James's brother showed up with a lawyer and a deed transfer and told her she had 2 days to vacate. "I need to see those papers," she said. "The complaint, the form letter, the boundary dispute from last year. Everything." "Why?" "Because if Boone's been harassing you for 5 years, there's a pattern. And if there's a pattern, there's a case." Ethan looked at her in the darkness. "You sound like a lawyer." "I sound like a woman who lost everything because she didn't have the right papers at the right time. I won't make that mistake again." He was quiet for a long moment. "Papers are in the bottom drawer of the desk in the front room," he said. "I'll look through them tomorrow." "Clara?" "Yeah." "Thank you." She shook her head. "Don't thank me yet. I haven't found anything." "I'm not thanking you for finding something. I'm thanking you for looking." She didn't answer. She picked up her coffee and drank. Somewhere in the house, Caleb cried out in his sleep. A single sharp sound that cut through the walls like a blade. Clara stood. Ethan stood at the same time. They looked at each other. I'll go, Clara said. You sure? I'm sure. She walked inside, down the hall, pushed open Caleb's door. He was sitting up in bed, sweat-soaked, eyes wide, gasping. Hey, Clara whispered. Hey, you're okay. I saw Mama. She was walking away. I called her, but she didn't turn around. Clara knelt beside the bed. Caleb, listen to me. Your Mama loved you. She didn't want to leave. Then why did she? Because sometimes the worst things happen to the people who least deserve them. And it isn't fair. It isn't right. But it's true. I want her to come back. I know you do. She's not coming back, is she? Clara's eyes burned. No, honey, she's not. Caleb's face crumpled. He grabbed Clara's sleeve and pressed his face against her arm and cried. Not the dramatic crying of a child throwing a tantrum, but the deep, shaking sobs of a little boy who understood loss in a way no 6-year-old should. Clara held him. She didn't shush him. She didn't tell him it was going to be okay. She just held him and let him cry until there was nothing left. When his breathing finally slowed, he looked up at her. Will you stay? Until I fall asleep? I'll stay. She sat on the edge of his bed, and he curled against her side, his small fingers gripping the fabric of her sleeve like it was the only solid thing in the world. Within minutes, he was asleep. Clara didn't move. From the doorway, a shadow shifted. Hannah stood there. She'd been watching. How long, Clara didn't know. The girl's face wasn't hard this time. It wasn't guarded, or hostile, or measuring. It was something else entirely. It was the face of a child who wanted to be held the same way, but was too old, and too proud, and too wounded to ask. Clara looked at her. There's room, she said softly. Hannah's chin trembled. Then she shook her head, turned away, and disappeared down the dark hall. The door to her bedroom closed quietly. Clara sat there in the darkness, holding a sleeping boy who wasn't hers, in a house that wasn't hers, in a life she hadn't planned. And she made a decision. She wasn't going to survive this. She was going to fight for it. Clara spent 3 days buried in Ethan's papers. She spread them across the kitchen table after the children went to bed. Letters, receipts, the boundary dispute from last year, the complaint to the territorial office, tax records going back 6 years. She read every word, twice. By the third night, she had something. Ethan came in from checking the cattle and found her sitting with a single piece of paper in her hand, her face pale in the lamplight. What is it? He asked. Boone's boundary dispute from last year. The one that cost you 4 months and $200. What about it? He filed it through the territorial office in Helena. Used a surveyor named Clarence DeFree. I remember. Little man. Bad teeth. Ethan, Clarence DeFree is Silas Boone's cousin. He went still. That's not in any record, he said. It's not, but this is. She held up a second paper, a property transfer from 1871. Boone sold 40 acres to a C. DeFree 8 years ago. Same man who surveyed your boundary line and ruled in Boone's favor. Ethan sat down hard. He rigged the survey. He rigged the survey. And if he rigged the survey, the boundary dispute was fraudulent, which means every legal claim Boone's made against your land since then is built on a lie. Can you prove it? I can prove DeFree and Boone are related by property transfer. I can prove DeFree was the sole surveyor on the dispute. And I can prove no second survey was ever ordered. That's enough to bring it before the territorial judge. Judge doesn't come until September. Then we make sure we survive until September. Ethan stared at the papers, then at Clara. His expression was something she hadn't seen from him before. Not gratitude exactly, Not admiration. Something raw. Something closer to disbelief that someone was fighting beside him. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked. "I didn't learn it. I lived it. When James died, his brother took our house, using a deed transfer I never saw coming. I spent 3 months in a boarding house trying to fight it. I lost because I didn't have the right evidence at the right time." She straightened the papers into a neat stack. "I won't lose like that again." "Clara, don't say thank you. I already told you that." "I wasn't going to say thank you." He paused. "I was going to say, I'm glad you didn't get on that train." She looked at him across the table. The lamp flickered between them. "Me too," she said quietly. Neither of them moved. The moment stretched. Then Clara stood, gathered the papers, and walked to her room. She closed the door and pressed her back against it. Her heart was beating faster than it should have been. She told herself it was the discovery, the papers, the case against Boone. She knew it wasn't. The next morning, everything changed. Clara was hanging laundry on the line when she heard hooves. Fast. Coming from the south road. She dropped the sheet in her hands and turned. A rider she didn't recognize pulled up hard in front of the house. Young man, dust-covered, breathing hard. "Mrs. Callahan?" "Yes?" "You need to get your husband. Boone's men blocked the irrigation gate on the North Creek, dammed it with rocks and timber overnight. Your cattle are cut off from the last water source." Clara's blood went cold. "Where's Ethan?" "South pasture. He don't know yet." "Who sent you?" "Doc Ellsworth. He saw Boone's men riding back at dawn and put it together." Clara didn't hesitate. She ran to the corral, saddled the roan mare, the only horse Ethan had left behind, and rode for the south pasture. She found Ethan repairing fence line. He saw her coming fast and dropped his tools. "What happened?" "Boone dammed the North Creek. Your cattle are cut off." Ethan's face went white, then red. His hands balled into fists. "I'll kill him." "No, you won't." Clara pulled the horse up short. "You ride out there angry, and he'll have witnesses. He'll say you threatened him. He'll use it against you in court." "There isn't going to be a court, Clara. By the time the judge gets here, my cattle will be dead." "Then we undam it ourselves." "That's his men, armed, on what he'll claim is his side of the creek." "It's not his side. The boundary survey was fraudulent. That creek belongs to you." "I can't prove that with a shovel." "You don't need to. You need to prove it with witnesses." She steadied the horse. "Ride into town. Get Doc Ellsworth. Get Reverend Calloway. Get anyone with a reputation who'll stand at that creek and watch while Boone's men stand on your land with a dam they built illegally." Ethan stared at her. "You want me to make it a public spectacle?" "I want you to make it evidence." He grabbed his saddle and mounted up in 30 seconds flat. "Stay with the children," he said. "I'm coming with you." "Clara, I said I'm coming." He looked at her. Sitting on that horse, in her widow's black, jaw set, eyes blazing. He'd married a woman with 23 cents and no future. Somewhere, in the past week, she'd become something else entirely. "Then ride fast," he said. They split at the fork. Ethan rode for town. Clara rode for the ranch to get Hannah and Caleb. She found Hannah on the porch. "Get your brother. We're going to town." "Why?" "Because Silas Boone just blocked our water, and your father needs help." Hannah's eyes widened. For the first time since Clara arrived, the girl didn't argue. She ran inside and came back carrying Caleb on her hip. "Let's go," Hannah said. They rode the wagon to Red Hollow in 20 minutes. Clara pushed the horses harder than she should have on that road, but she didn't care. When they arrived, Ethan was already outside the general store with Doc Ellsworth and 3 other men. Reverend Calloway was crossing the street toward them. And standing on the boardwalk in front of the bank, watching everything, was Silas Boone. He leaned against the post with his arms crossed, chewing a toothpick, calm as a man watching a show he'd already scripted. Clara climbed down from the wagon and walked directly toward him. "Mrs. Callahan," Boone said, "you look upset." "You damned our creek." Now that's a strong accusation. My men were clearing debris from the North Wash. If some of that debris ended up in the creek, well, that's the territory for you. Debris doesn't arrange itself into a wall, Mr. Boone. You'd be surprised what a flash storm can do. There hasn't been a storm in 6 weeks. Boone's smile thinned. He took the toothpick from his mouth. "Mrs. Callahan, you've been in this valley for about a week. You married a man you don't know, you're living on land you don't understand, and you're picking a fight with the wrong person." Clara stepped closer. "I know exactly who I'm picking a fight with. I know about Clarence DeFree. I know about the survey. And I know what a fraudulent boundary claim looks like when I'm standing on one." Boone's smile disappeared. For the first time since she'd arrived in Red Hollow, Clara saw something real behind Silas Boone's mask. Not anger. Fear. It lasted half a second. Then it was gone. "You're a clever woman," he said quietly. "But clever doesn't keep cattle alive." He pushed off the post and walked toward his horse. "Enjoy the summer, Mrs. Callahan. What's left of it." He rode out of town without looking back. Ethan appeared at Clara's side. "What did you say to him?" "I told him I know about DeFree." "And?" "He's scared." "Boone doesn't get scared." "Every man gets scared when his lie starts to unravel." She turned to face him. "We need to go to that creek, now, with witnesses." They rode out. Ethan, Clara, Doc Ellsworth, Reverend Calloway, and 2 ranchers named Sullivan and Gaines, who'd had their own problems with Boone over the years. Hannah stayed in town with Caleb at the general store. Clara hadn't wanted the children anywhere near that creek. When they reached the North Bend, Clara saw it. A wall of rocks and timber stacked across the narrowest point of the creek. Deliberate. Engineered. The water behind it was pooling into a stagnant pond, while the downstream side, Ethan's side, was drying to cracked mud. 3 of Boone's men sat on horseback on the far bank, armed, watching. Ethan's hands tightened on his reins. "Easy," Clara said under her breath. Doc Ellsworth rode forward. "I'll document the dam and the position of Boone's men. Reverend, you stand witness." "I'm standing," Calloway said. Sullivan and Gaines dismounted and began pulling rocks from the dam. Boone's men didn't move. They watched. One of them spat tobacco. "You're on Double B property," the lead rider called. "We're on Callahan property," Clara called back. "And we have 6 witnesses who'll testify to that in front of the territorial judge." The rider looked at his companions. They exchanged glances. Nobody had expected this. Boone had told them it would be Ethan alone. Angry, reckless, easy to provoke into something that could be used against him. Instead, there was a woman in black standing beside a doctor, a preacher, and 2 neighboring ranchers, all watching them commit what could be legally argued as sabotage. The lead rider turned his horse. "Let's go," he muttered. They left. The dam came apart in under an hour. Water surged through the gap and flowed downstream toward Ethan's land. Not much. The creek was still dangerously low. But enough. Enough for now. They rode back to town in silence. When they reached the general store, Hannah was sitting on the steps with Caleb asleep across her lap. She looked up at Clara. "Did you fix it?" "For now." "Is Boone going to do it again?" "Probably." "What are you going to do about it?" Clara looked at the girl, 12 years old, carrying a sleeping boy, asking a woman she barely trusted what the plan was. Because somewhere in the past week, despite everything, Hannah had started asking Clara instead of waiting for her father. "I'm going to make sure it doesn't matter if he does," Clara said. Hannah nodded. Once. Sharp. Like a soldier accepting orders from a commander she'd reluctantly decided to follow. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara told Ethan everything. She sat at the kitchen table with every piece of paper she'd gathered. The Dufresne connection, the property transfer, the irrigation gate incident from last year, the boundary dispute records, and a timeline she'd written out by hand, connecting every act of sabotage Boone had committed over 5 years. "This is a pattern," she said. "He's been doing this systematically. Not random harassment. A strategy. He's trying to make you sell by making it impossible to survive." "I know what he's doing." "But you haven't been documenting it. You haven't been building a case. You've been absorbing it." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I've been raising 2 kids and running a ranch." "I know, and now you have help." She slid the timeline across the table. "If we present this to the territorial judge in September, we don't just defend your water rights. We file a counterclaim for damages. 5 years of harassment, lost cattle, legal fees from the fraudulent boundary dispute. We go on offense." Ethan picked up the timeline, read it slowly. His face changed as he went through it, from skepticism to recognition to something that looked a lot like fury at himself for not seeing the pattern sooner. "I should have done this years ago," he said. "You didn't have anyone to help you see it." He set the paper down. "Clara, if Boone finds out what we're building, he won't just block a creek. He'll come after us directly. He's already coming after us directly. I mean the kind of trouble that involves fire and lawyers and people disappearing from their homes. I know what you mean." "And you're not afraid?" Clara looked at him across the table. The lamp between them. The papers spread like a battle map. The house quiet around them, 2 children sleeping down the hall. "I've already lost everything once," she said. "Everything. My home, my husband, my name, my worth. I spent 11 months being afraid. I'm done." Ethan held her gaze. "You're the strongest person I've ever met," he said. "Don't say that." "It's true." "Then don't say it like you're surprised." He almost laughed. She saw it, the way it pulled at his mouth, the way he fought it, the way it won anyway. A small, rough sound that came out like a cough, but was unmistakably a laugh. It was the first time she'd heard him laugh since she married him. Something cracked open between them. Not romance, not yet. Something more dangerous. Trust. Real trust. The kind that doesn't come from vows or legal documents, but from sitting across a table from someone at midnight and knowing in your bones that they won't leave when it gets bad. Clara stood and gathered the papers. "Tomorrow I need to go to the county records office in Helena," she said. "Helena's a day's ride." "I know. I'll take the early stage." "Alone?" "Unless you want to leave the children with Hannah for 2 days. She's 12. She's been running your house for 2 years. She can manage." Ethan rubbed his face. "I don't like you going alone." "I don't need you to like it. I need you to trust me." He dropped his hands. "I trust you," he said. And the way he said it, without hesitation, without qualification, told Clara more about where they stood than any conversation they'd had since the courthouse. "Good," she said. "I'll leave at dawn." She walked toward the hall, stopped. "Ethan." "Yeah?" "If Boone comes while I'm gone, don't engage him. Don't go to his ranch. Don't confront his men. Just document everything and wait." "And if he pushes?" "Let him push. A man who pushes when he's scared makes mistakes. That's what I'm counting on." She disappeared down the hall. Ethan sat at the table for a long time. The lamp burned low. The papers sat in their neat stack. Outside, the heat pressed against the house like a living thing. He picked up the marriage certificate from the stack, unfolded it, read their names side by side. Ethan Callahan, Clara Whitmore Callahan. 9 days ago, he'd married a stranger. Tonight, he realized he'd married the only person in this valley who might actually save everything he had. And that terrified him more than Silas Boone ever could. Because saving the ranch was one thing. What was happening at that kitchen table? The way she looked at him. The way he'd started listening for her footsteps. The way her voice had become the last sound he wanted to hear before sleep. That was something else entirely. And Ethan Callahan was not ready for it. Not even close. The next morning, Clara boarded the stage to Helena, carrying a leather satchel full of papers and a plan she hadn't told anyone about. Not even Ethan. Because what she was going to do in Helena wasn't just pull records. She was going to find out exactly how much land Silas Boone had stolen from his neighbors over the past decade. And she was going to make sure every single one of them knew about it. Caleb stood at the fence and waved until the stage disappeared. Hannah stood on the porch with her arms crossed. "She'll come back," Caleb said. Hannah didn't answer. "She promised," he said. "She didn't promise. She said she planned on staying. That's different." Caleb looked up at his sister. "No, it isn't." Hannah opened her mouth to argue. Then she stopped. Because for the first time in 2 years, her little brother wasn't afraid. He was standing at that fence, watching the dust settle, and he wasn't crying. He wasn't asking if someone was going to leave. He wasn't having a nightmare. He was just standing there, calm, sure. And Hannah hated Clara for it. Because if Caleb loved her and she left, it would break him worse than losing their mother did. And if she stayed, then Hannah would have to stop fighting. She'd have to let someone in. She'd have to admit that she was tired, so desperately, crushingly tired, of being the strong one. And that scared her more than any drought or any man on a gray horse ever could. She turned and walked inside. The screen door didn't slam this time. It closed softly. And somehow, that was worse. Clara came back from Helena on the evening stage 2 days later, carrying the same leather satchel she'd left with, only now it was twice as heavy. Caleb saw the dust from the road before anyone else. He bolted from the porch and ran so fast he nearly tripped over his own boots. "You came back!" Clara stepped down from the stage and caught him. He threw his arms around her waist and pressed his face against her stomach. She put her hand on his head and held it there. "I told you I would. Hannah said maybe you wouldn't." "Hannah worries. That's her job." She looked up. Hannah stood on the porch, arms crossed, but her eyes were different. Not hostile, watchful. Like she'd spent 2 days preparing for Clara not to come back, and didn't know what to do now that she had. "Hey," Clara said. "Hey," Hannah said back. That was all, but it was more than they'd had before. Ethan came around from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. He stopped when he saw her. Something moved across his face. Relief, maybe, or something he wasn't ready to call by its real name. "How was Helena?" he asked. "Productive." Clara patted Caleb's back. "Inside, buddy. I need to talk to your father." "About what?" "Grown-up things." "I hate grown-up things." "I know. Go find your sister." Caleb reluctantly detached himself and ran back toward the house. Clara waited until the screen door closed. Then she opened the satchel. "How many neighbors has Boone bought out in the last 10 years?" she asked. Ethan thought. 4, maybe 5. 7. Clara pulled out a stack of papers. I went through every land transfer in the county records office. 7 independent ranchers sold their water rights to Boone between 1869 and 1877. Every single one of them sold during a drought year. Every single one of them sold for less than half the land's value. That's not illegal. That's just Boone being Boone. You're right. That part isn't illegal. She pulled out another document. But this is. 3 of those 7 sales were preceded by boundary disputes surveyed by Clarence DeFree. Same surveyor, same result. Boone's boundary expanded, neighbor's boundary shrunk. Neighbor couldn't afford to fight it. Neighbor sold. Ethan took the papers from her hand. He's been running the same play for a decade, he said. Longer. And nobody caught it because each rancher thought they were alone. They didn't talk to each other. They didn't compare notes. They just sold and left. And you found all of this in 2 days? I found all of this because I knew what to look for. She closed the satchel. Ethan, I also found something else. Something I wasn't expecting. What? 2 of those 7 ranchers didn't leave Montana. Tom Waverly moved to Billings, runs a feed store. Frank Jessup is in Bozeman, works for the railroad. So? So they're still in the territory. They can testify. Ethan went very still. You want to bring them to the hearing. I want to bring their stories to the hearing. 7 ranchers, same pattern, same surveyor, same outcome. That's not bad luck, Ethan. That's a criminal operation. And if we put it in front of the territorial judge, with documentation and living witnesses, Boone doesn't just lose his claim on your water. He loses everything. Ethan stared at the papers in his hands. She could see his mind working. The rancher in him calculating risk. The father in him calculating what failure would cost. And something else, something deeper. Calculating what it meant that this woman had ridden to Helena alone and come back with the ammunition to fight a war he'd been losing for 5 years. Boone will find out, he said. Probably. He'll retaliate. Almost certainly. And you're not. If you ask me if I'm afraid one more time, Ethan Callahan, I'm going to throw this satchel at your head. He looked at her, and then he did something she'd only seen once before. That rough, reluctant laugh that broke through his stoicism like water through a crack. All right, he said. All right. What do we do first? First, we write to Waverly and Jessup. Then we organize every document into a formal complaint. Then we wait for September. And between now and September, we survive, same as we've been doing. He folded the papers carefully and handed them back to her. Clara. What? When this is over, win or lose, I want you to know something. She waited. He opened his mouth, closed it, shook his head. Never mind. Not the right time. He turned and walked back toward the barn. Clara stood in the yard, holding her satchel, watching him go. She knew what he'd been about to say. She wasn't ready to hear it either. Not yet. Not while they were still at war. 10 days passed. The letters went out. Tom Waverly wrote back within a week. A short, angry letter that said he'd been waiting 7 years for someone to ask him what Boone had done. He'd ride to Red Hollow for the hearing. Gladly. Frank Jessup's response took longer. When it came, it was cautious. He had a family now, a steady job. He didn't want trouble. Clara wrote him back. 1 page. She told him about the dam, about the cattle, about the fraudulent survey. She told him she understood fear because she'd lived inside it for a year. And then she told him that fear was exactly what Boone counted on. Jessup wrote back 3 days later. 2 words. I'll come. Clara folded the letter and put it in the satchel with everything else. The case was building. She could feel its weight now, not just the paper, but the momentum, the gathering force of something that had been wrong for a long time, finally being called what it was. But Boone wasn't idle. The first sign came on a Thursday morning. Clara walked out to the chicken coop and found every bird dead. Necks wrung, laid out in a row on the ground, deliberate, neat. A message. She stood there looking at them for a long time. Caleb came around the corner. "Clara, what happened to the—" "Go inside, Caleb." "But, now." He ran. She heard the screen door slam. Ethan came from the barn. He saw the chickens. His face went dark. "Boone," he said. "Who else?" "That's 12 birds. That's our eggs for the next 3 months." "I know." "I'm going to his ranch." "No." "Clara, you go to his ranch. You're doing exactly what he wants. He wants a confrontation. He wants you to throw a punch so he can drag you in front of Sheriff Morris and press charges." She knelt down and started gathering the birds. "We document this. We add it to the complaint. And we keep building." "There won't be anything left to build by September if he keeps this up." "Then we build faster." Ethan grabbed a shovel and started digging. They buried the chickens behind the barn without another word. Hannah found out at supper. "He killed our chickens?" "Yes," Clara said. "All of them?" "All of them." Hannah's fork clattered against her plate. "Why is nobody doing anything?" "We are doing something," Clara said. "We're building a legal case." "Legal case." Hannah's voice cracked with frustration. "He kills our chickens and we write a letter? Papa, this is—" "Hannah," Ethan said, "it's not fair." "I know it's not fair." "Mama would have—" Hannah stopped herself. Her face flushed. She looked down at her plate. The table went silent. Clara waited. "Your mama would have what?" Clara asked gently. "Nothing." "Say it. It's okay." Hannah's chin trembled. "Mama would have marched over there herself and told him to his face." "Your mama sounds like she was fierce." "She was." "Then she'd understand what I'm about to say." Clara leaned forward. "Fierce doesn't always mean loud. Sometimes fierce means quiet. Sometimes fierce means sitting at a kitchen table at midnight, going through 10 years of paperwork to take apart a man's empire, piece by piece." Boone expects noise. He's built his whole life around people who make noise and then give up. We're not going to give him noise. We're going to give him evidence. And evidence is the one thing he can't kill. Hannah stared at her. "You really think you can beat him?" "I think we can. All of us." Hannah picked up her fork. She didn't say anything else. But she ate everything on her plate, which was more than she'd done since Clara arrived. After supper, Clara found Hannah in the hallway. "Hannah." "What?" "I need your help with something." "What kind of help?" "I need someone to organize these documents by date while I write the formal complaint. Your father's handwriting is terrible, and Caleb can barely spell his name. You're the only one who can do it." Hannah narrowed her eyes. "You're giving me a job so I feel included." "I'm giving you a job because I need help, and you're smart enough to do it." Pause. "Fine," Hannah said, "but I'm not doing it because you asked. I'm doing it because Boone killed our chickens." "Good enough." They sat at the kitchen table that night, Clara writing, Hannah sorting, Ethan cleaning his rifle in the front room, and Caleb asleep on the settee with his thumb in his mouth. The house was quiet in a different way than before. Not the silence of strangers tolerating each other. The silence of people working toward the same thing. At 10 o'clock, Hannah set down the last document and looked at the organized stacks. "Clara?" "Yeah?" There's something else in here. Papa's tax records from 1876. What about them? The tax assessment on the north pasture went up 40% that year. No improvements, no new acreage, just the assessment. Clara stopped writing. Who signed the assessment? Hannah flipped the page. County assessor. Name's William Harwell. Clara's pen dropped. Margaret Harwell's husband. The banker? The banker who plays cards at Boone's ranch. Clara pulled the paper toward her. Boone didn't just rig the surveys, he rigged the tax assessments too. He drove up your father's property taxes to squeeze him financially, while simultaneously undermining his land boundaries. Is that illegal? That's corruption, Hannah, and it means the Harwells are involved. Hannah's eyes went wide. Mrs. Harwell, the one who called you... The one who called me Baron, yes. Clara stared at the tax record. Her husband's been helping Boone steal land from your family for years. And she stood in that churchyard and judged me. Something shifted in Hannah's face. Not sympathy exactly. Something harder. Solidarity. What do we do? Hannah asked. We add it to the case. And then? And then when September comes, Mrs. Harwell is going to watch her husband answer for it in front of the whole town. Hannah sat back in her chair. I think I like you, Clara. Clara almost dropped her pen again. She looked at the girl, this fierce, wounded, stubborn 12-year-old who'd spent 2 weeks fighting her with everything she had. I think I like you too, Hannah. Don't make a thing of it. I won't. They went back to work, but something had sealed between them that couldn't be unsealed. Not a mother-daughter bond. Something different. Something built on shared fury and mutual respect, and the particular closeness that comes from discovering an enemy together. The following Sunday, Boone made his boldest move yet. Clara was in town buying flour at the general store when she heard a commotion outside. She stepped onto the boardwalk and saw a crowd gathering in front of the courthouse. A notice had been posted on the door. She pushed through and read it. Territorial petition for annulment of marriage, Callahan. Filed by Silas Boone on behalf of the public interest. Grounds: fraudulent marriage entered for purposes of land retention. No prior courtship. No community standing of bride. No biological capacity for family continuation. Hearing date: moved up from September to August 15th. Clara read it twice. Her hand shook. Not from fear, from rage. Boone had petitioned to annul her marriage. He'd moved the hearing date forward by a month, and he'd put it on the courthouse door for the entire town to see. She turned around. Margaret Harwell stood across the street, watching. Not smiling, not frowning, just watching. The way people watch when they already know how the story ends. Clara walked to the general store, bought her flour, loaded the wagon. She didn't say a word to anyone. When she got home, she set the flour on the table and told Ethan. He slammed his fist against the wall. He can't do this! He already did. On what authority? A private citizen can't file an annulment petition. He filed it as a concerned party with financial interest. He's claiming your marriage was entered fraudulently to secure water rights. That's a lie. Of course it's a lie. But if the judge hears his petition before he hears our counterclaim, Boone sets the narrative. He makes us defend the marriage instead of prosecuting his crimes. August 15th. That's 3 weeks. I know. Are we ready? Not yet, but we will be. Clara spent the next 3 weeks preparing like a general preparing for a siege. She wrote to Tom Waverly and Frank Jessup, moving up their travel. Waverly confirmed immediately. Jessup hesitated, then agreed. She organized every document, every letter, every record into a bound presentation. She wrote a timeline. She cross-referenced the DeFree surveys with the Harwell tax assessments, with the land transfers, with the dates of sabotage. Hannah helped every night. Caleb drew pictures at the end of the table and declared himself the official helper, even though his contributions consisted mostly of passing papers and spilling ink. Ethan rode the property line every day, documenting any new damage. 2 fence sections were cut. A water trough was poisoned. Ethan caught it before the cattle drank. He wrote it all down, dated it, and added it to Clara's stack. 3 days before the hearing, something happened that Clara didn't expect. She was hanging laundry when Doc Ellsworth rode up to the house. "Mrs. Callahan, got a moment?" "What is it?" "I've been talking to people in town, quietly, about the hearing." "And?" "You've got more friends than you think." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "Sullivan and Gaines want to testify about the dam. Agnes Whitfield, the old woman who witnessed your wedding, she's been keeping a personal journal of Boone's activities for 15 years. She'll bring it to the hearing." Clara took the paper. It was a list of names, 8 people willing to speak. "Why?" she asked. "Why now?" "Because you did something nobody else did, Mrs. Callahan. You fought back. This whole valley's been afraid of Silas Boone for a decade. You showed up with 23 cents and a black dress, and you fought back. People noticed." Clara folded the list and held it against her chest. "Thank you, Doc." "Don't thank me. Thank Agnes Whitfield. That woman's been waiting 15 years for someone to hand that journal to." He tipped his hat and rode away. Clara stood in the yard, holding the list. Her throat was tight. She wasn't alone anymore. She hadn't been alone for a while, she realized. She just hadn't let herself believe it. The night before the hearing, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch in the dark. The heat had broken slightly, not enough for rain, but enough to breathe. Ethan came out and sat beside her. Neither spoke for a long time. "Scared?" he asked. "Terrified." "You don't look terrified." "I've had practice." He turned to her. In the darkness, she could barely see his face, but she could feel his presence. Solid, steady, the particular gravity of a man who'd learned to carry weight without complaint. "Clara, whatever happens tomorrow, don't. Let me finish." She closed her eyes. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I want you to know that this marriage stopped being paper a long time ago. For me, at least." She didn't open her eyes. "When?" she whispered. "The night you sat with Caleb, when he was having nightmares. You didn't have to do that. You'd been in this house 4 hours. You had no obligation, and you sat with my boy until he fell asleep." "Any decent person would have done that." "No, they wouldn't have. I've watched decent people walk past suffering my whole life. Decent people say the right things and do nothing. You did something." Clara opened her eyes. He was closer than she expected. Close enough that she could see the lines around his eyes, the weathering, the grief that had carved itself into his features and made them something harder and truer than handsome. "Ethan?" "Yeah?" "I need to tell you something too." "Okay." "I'm not fighting Boone just for the ranch. I'm not fighting him just for the water, or the land, or the cattle." "I know." "I'm fighting because this is the first time in my life I've had something worth fighting for. And I include you in that. I include Hannah and Caleb. I include this porch and this table and this stupid, stubborn drought. Her voice broke, just slightly, just enough to be real. I am fighting for my life, Ethan. This life. The one I didn't plan. The one I didn't expect. And I will not let Silas Boone take it from me. He reached out and took her hand. Not romantic, not gentle. Firm. The way you grip someone's hand when you're both standing on the edge of something and neither of you knows if the ground will hold. She gripped back. They sat like that on the porch until the first gray light of dawn touched the valley. Then Clara stood. "Time to get dressed," she said. "Clara." "Yeah?" "Win this." She looked at him. "I intend to." She walked inside and closed the door. In her room, she opened the satchel one final time. Every document was in order. Every witness was confirmed. Every piece of evidence was catalogued, dated, and cross-referenced. She put on her black dress, the same one she'd worn the day she arrived, the same one she'd worn when Margaret Harwell called her Baron, the same one she'd worn when Ethan Callahan looked at her on that train platform and saw something no one else in that town had bothered to see. A woman worth fighting beside. She buttoned the collar, smoothed the fabric, and looked at her reflection in the small mirror on the wall. "Okay," she said to herself, "let's end this." She picked up the satchel and walked out to the wagon where Ethan, Hannah, and Caleb were already waiting. Hannah looked at her. "You look like you're going to war," the girl said. Clara climbed onto the wagon. "I am." The wagon pulled into Red Hollow at 8:30. The hearing was set for 9. Clara had expected a quiet proceeding. A judge, a clerk, Boone and his lawyer, maybe a handful of onlookers. What she found when they turned onto Main Street made her grip the edge of the wagon seat. The courthouse steps were packed. Every rancher in the valley, every shopkeeper, every wife, every widow, every farmhand who could spare the morning. They stood in clusters along the boardwalk, sat on barrel tops, leaned against hitching posts. The general store had closed for the day. Even the saloon was dark. Red Hollow had come to watch. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop and looked at Clara. "You ready for this?" She picked up the leather satchel and climbed down. "I've been ready for 3 weeks." Hannah jumped off the back of the wagon, then lifted Caleb down. The boy reached for Clara's hand. She took it without looking down. Natural, automatic. The way a mother takes a child's hand without thinking. Hannah noticed. She didn't say anything. They walked toward the courthouse. The crowd parted. Not out of respect exactly, out of curiosity. Every eye tracked Clara as she climbed the steps in her black dress, satchel in one hand, Caleb's fingers in the other. At the top of the steps, Agnes Whitfield sat in a wooden chair, her hands folded over a leather-bound journal thick enough to be a Bible. "Morning, Mrs. Callahan," Agnes said. "Morning, Agnes. You brought it?" 15 years of Silas Boone's sins, dated and documented." The old woman smiled. "I've been waiting a long time for today." Clara nodded and walked inside. The courtroom was small, 6 rows of benches, a judge's table at the front. No raised platform, no gavel, no formality beyond a territorial seal hanging crookedly on the wall. Silas Boone was already seated on the left side. He wore his best suit, dark wool despite the heat, and beside him sat a lawyer Clara had never seen. Thin man, sharp face, papers stacked in front of him with the precision of someone who'd done this before. Boone looked at Clara as she entered. He smiled. That smile said everything. "I've already won. You just don't know it yet." Clara sat down on the right side, Ethan beside her, Hannah and Caleb behind them. Doc Ellsworth slid into the bench next, then Sullivan, then Gaines, then Agnes Whitfield, journal on her lap. Tom Waverly walked in from the back of the room. He was a thick man with sun-damaged hands and the kind of face that had been angry for 7 years. He nodded at Clara and took his seat. Frank Jessup followed, thinner, nervous. He didn't look at Boone. He sat down and gripped his knees. The territorial judge entered at 9 sharp. His name was Howard Mercer. Tall, gray-bearded. He walked with a limp from a cavalry wound and had the expression of a man who'd seen too much of the territory to be impressed by any of it. He sat down, opened a ledger, and looked at the room. This hearing concerns 2 matters. First, a petition for annulment of marriage filed by Mr. Silas Boone against the union of Ethan and Clara Callahan. Second, I've received a counter-complaint filed by Mrs. Clara Callahan alleging a pattern of fraud, sabotage, and corruption by Mr. Boone against multiple landowners in this valley. He looked at Boone. Mr. Boone, you filed first. You speak first. Boone's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client brings this petition out of genuine concern for the integrity of land ownership in this valley. Ethan Callahan married a woman he'd known for less than 1 hour. A woman with no ties to this community, no prior courtship, and, with respect, no capacity to produce heirs for the continuation of a family land claim. Clara's jaw tightened. Ethan's hand moved toward hers under the table. She shook her head slightly. Not now. The lawyer continued. Furthermore, Mrs. Callahan demanded a written land protection clause in the marriage agreement, suggesting the union was entered primarily for property purposes, rather than genuine matrimonial intent. Judge Mercer wrote something down. Is that the substance of the petition? It is, Your Honor. Mrs. Callahan, you filed a counter-complaint. I'll hear you now. Clara stood. She didn't have a lawyer. She had a satchel. She opened it and placed 7 documents on the table in front of the judge. Your Honor, I appreciate the court's time. Before I address the annulment petition, I'd like to present evidence that the petitioner, Mr. Boone, has engaged in a decade-long pattern of fraud designed to force independent ranchers off their land. Boone's smile flickered. This is a marriage hearing, his lawyer interrupted, not a criminal proceeding. Your Honor, Clara said calmly, Mr. Boone filed this petition to annul my marriage. His stated reason is concern for land integrity. I intend to show that Mr. Boone's actual concern is acquiring my husband's water rights, the same way he's acquired water rights from 7 other ranchers over the past 10 years. Through fraud. Judge Mercer looked at Boone, then at Clara. I'll allow it, he said. Continue. Clara's hands trembled. She pressed them flat against the table. In 1871, Mr. Boone sold 40 acres to a man named Clarence Dufresne. She placed the property transfer in front of the judge. In 1874, 1876, and 1877, the same Clarence Dufresne served as the sole surveyor in 3 separate boundary disputes filed by Mr. Boone against neighboring ranchers. In all 3 cases, the survey ruled in Mr. Boone's favor. In all 3 cases, the neighboring rancher was forced to sell within 6 months. The courtroom went quiet. Mr. Dufresne is Mr. Boone's cousin by marriage, Your Honor, a fact that was never disclosed during any of those proceedings. Boone's lawyer leaned over and whispered something to his client. Boone's face didn't change, but his hands, folded on the table, tightened. Furthermore, Clara continued, I have evidence that the property tax assessments on my husband's north pasture were inflated by 40% in 1876 by County Assessor William Harwell. A gasp from the gallery. Clara didn't need to look. She knew Margaret Harwell was in the room. Mr. Harwell is a regular guest at Mr. Boone's ranch and has financial ties that I believe constitute a conflict of interest. Objection, Boone's lawyer said. This is speculation. It's documented. Clara placed the tax record on the table. Signed by Mr. Harwell himself. Judge Mercer examined the paper. Go on, Mrs. Callahan. In the past month alone, Mr. Boone's men have dammed our irrigation creek, cut our fence line, poisoned a water trough, and killed 12 chickens on our property. She placed Doc Ellsworth's written account on the table. These incidents were witnessed by Dr. James Ellsworth, Reverend Thomas Calloway, and ranchers Sullivan and Gaines, all of whom are present today. She turned and looked at Boone for the first time since she'd begun. Mr. Boone did not file this annulment petition because he cares about marriage. He filed it because I found out what he's been doing, and he wants me removed from this valley before I can prove it. Silence. Judge Mercer set down his pen. Mr. Boone, do you wish to respond? Boone stood, slowly. He buttoned his jacket and cleared his throat. Your Honor, Mrs. Callahan is a desperate woman. She arrived in this town with nothing. She married a man she didn't know to secure a roof over her head. Now she's fabricating accusations against me to justify a fraudulent marriage. I'd like to call witnesses, Your Honor, Clara said. Proceed. Tom Waverly stood first. He walked to the front of the room, and when he turned to face the gallery, his hands were shaking. My name is Tom Waverly. I owned 160 acres south of the Double B from 1867 to 1874. In 73, Boone filed a boundary dispute. Surveyor named DeFree came out, said my fence was 12 yards over the line. Cost me everything I had to fight it. I lost. Sold to Boone for 30 cents an acre. Land was worth $1.10. Thank you, Mr. Waverly, Judge Mercer said. Frank Jessup went next. His voice was quiet but steady. Same thing. 1876. DeFree surveyed my boundary, said I was encroaching on Boone's water access. I couldn't afford to fight it. I sold. My wife cried for a month. Jessup sat down and stared at the floor. Sullivan testified about the dam. Gaines testified about the fence cutting. Doc Ellsworth testified about the poison trough and the dead chickens. Then Agnes Whitfield stood. She was 81 years old and moved like every step cost her something. She carried her journal to the front of the room and set it on the table. Your Honor, my name is Agnes Whitfield. I've lived in Red Hollow since 1843. I was here before the town had a name. I've buried 3 husbands and watched this valley change from open land to fenced property. And in all that time, I've never seen a man operate like Silas Boone. She opened the journal. I've been keeping records for 15 years. Dates, names, what I saw and what I heard. I started because my second husband lost 40 acres to Boone in '64, and I swore I'd never forget it. She looked at Boone. I haven't forgotten, Silas. Not one day. She placed the journal in front of the judge. 15 years, Your Honor. It's all in there. Judge Mercer picked up the journal. He turned pages slowly. The courtroom waited. Then Boone's lawyer stood. Your Honor, this is a collection of gossip from an elderly woman with a personal vendetta. It has no legal standing. It has standing as a corroborating account, Judge Mercer said without looking up. Sit down. The lawyer sat. Mercer read for a long time. The room held its breath. Finally, he closed the journal and looked at Clara. Mrs. Callahan, is there anything else? One more thing, Your Honor. She turned to the gallery. Hannah, would you come up here? Ethan's head snapped toward Clara. She hadn't told him about this. Hannah's eyes went wide. Me? You don't have to, but if you want to, I'd like the judge to hear from you. Hannah looked at her father. Ethan's face was tight with surprise, but he didn't stop her. He nodded once. Hannah stood up. She walked to the front of the room. She was 12 years old and barely tall enough to see over the table, but she stood straight and looked at Judge Mercer without flinching. "Your name?" the judge asked. "Hannah Callahan." "How old are you?" 12. "And what would you like to say?" Hannah swallowed. Her hands were shaking. She clasped them behind her back. "My mama died 2 years ago. Since then, I've been taking care of my brother and trying to keep the house running and doing everything I could so my papa didn't have to worry about us, on top of everything else." She paused. "When Papa married Clara, I hated her. I thought she was trying to replace my mama. I thought she was using us. I thought she'd leave as soon as things got hard." She looked at Clara. "She didn't leave. Things got hard every single day, and she didn't leave. She sat with my brother when he had nightmares. She stood up to Mrs. Harwell when she called her names. She rode to Helena alone to find evidence. She organized papers at our kitchen table every night until midnight." Hannah's voice cracked. "And she asked me to help. Nobody asks me to help. Everybody just tells me to be strong. Clara asked me to help because she said I was smart enough. That's the first time any adult has said that to me since my mama died." Tears ran down her face. She didn't wipe them. "Mr. Boone says this marriage is fake. But I was there when Clara held my brother at 2 in the morning. I was there when she stood between my father and a man who wants to take everything from us. I was there every night at that kitchen table. And I'm telling you, this is not a fake family." She took a breath. "This is the most real thing I've had in 2 years." The courtroom was silent. Clara's eyes were burning. She didn't look away from Hannah. She couldn't. Caleb stood up on the bench behind them. "She fights for us," he shouted. "She's not temporary." A sound moved through the gallery. Not laughter. Something warmer. Something that broke open the tightness in the room and let it breathe. Judge Mercer looked at Caleb. "Sit down, son." "Yes, sir." Caleb sat down, then added, "But she does fight for us." Mercer turned to Boone. "Mr. Boone, I've heard testimony from 7 witnesses. I've reviewed documented evidence of fraudulent surveys, inflated tax assessments, and recent acts of property destruction. I've read 15 years of journal entries from a woman who has no reason to lie." He closed his ledger. "Your petition for annulment is denied. The marriage of Ethan and Clara Callahan is legally sound, entered willingly by both parties, and recognized by this court." Clara exhaled. "Furthermore," Mercer continued, "I am ordering a full investigation into the survey work of Clarence Dufresne, the tax assessments signed by William Harwell, and the land acquisitions made by you, Mr. Boone, over the past decade. You are ordered to cease all activity on or near Callahan property, effective immediately. Violation of this order will result in arrest." Boone stood slowly. His face was gray. "You're making a mistake, Judge." "The only mistake I see in this courtroom, Mr. Boone, is that it took this long for someone to bring this evidence forward." Mercer looked at Clara. "Mrs. Callahan, I commend your diligence. This court will review the full countercomplaint at the September session. I suggest you have your witnesses available." "They will be, Your Honor." "This hearing is adjourned." The gavel came down. The room erupted. Not cheering exactly. Red Hollow wasn't the cheering kind. But movement. Voices. Hands reaching for Clara's. Tom Waverly grabbed her hand and shook it so hard her shoulder ached. Frank Jessup just nodded, his eyes red, his mouth pressed tight, and said, "Thank you, ma'am. 7 years I waited." Agnes Whitfield took her journal back from the table and tucked it under her arm. 15 years, she said to Clara. You did in 3 weeks what I couldn't do in 15 years. You did the hard part, Agnes. You kept the records. And you had the guts to use them. Doc Ellsworth clapped Ethan on the shoulder. You married well, Callahan. Don't I know it, Ethan said quietly. Clara turned and found Hannah standing behind her. The girl's face was still wet. Her arms were at her sides, not crossed, not guarding, not defending. Open. Clara didn't reach for her. She waited. Hannah stepped forward and put her arms around Clara's waist, tight, fierce, the way a child holds on when they finally decided to stop letting go. Clara held her back. Thank you, Hannah whispered, for asking me to help. Thank you for saying yes. Hannah pulled back and wiped her face with her sleeve. Don't tell anyone I cried. Wouldn't dream of it. Caleb crashed into both of them from the side, wrapping his arms around whatever he could reach. We won! We won! Did we win? We won, buddy, Clara said. Can we get candy? We can get candy. 2 pieces? Don't push it. They walked out of the courthouse together, the 4 of them. Ethan held the door. On the steps, Clara stopped. Margaret Harwell stood at the bottom, alone. Her husband had already left. Clara had seen him slip out the side door the moment Mercer mentioned the tax investigation. The women who usually flanked Margaret were gone. She stood by herself on the street, her parasol closed, her face drawn. Clara walked down the steps. She stopped in front of Margaret. The 2 women looked at each other. Mrs. Harwell, Clara said. Margaret's chin trembled. I didn't know, Margaret said. About William. About what he was doing with Boone. I didn't know. Clara studied her face. She wanted to be angry. She had earned the right to be angry. This woman had called her barren in public, had whispered about her, had tried to humiliate her on the worst day of her life. But Clara looked at Margaret Harwell and saw something she recognized. A woman standing alone on a street corner, realizing that everything she'd built her identity around was crumbling. Clara knew what that felt like. I believe you, Clara said. Margaret's eyes filled. I'm sorry for what I said. At the train station, at the church, all of it. I know. Can you forgive me? Clara was quiet for a moment. I can try, she said. That's the best I've got. Margaret nodded. She opened her parasol, turned, and walked away down Main Street. Alone. Clara watched her go. Ethan came up beside her. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know. Most people wouldn't have. I'm not most people. He looked at her. That look again. The one that had started at the kitchen table and grown every day since. The one that said he was watching something take shape that he hadn't believed was possible. No, he said. You are not. They loaded the wagon and drove home. Caleb fell asleep in Hannah's lap before they reached the ridge. Hannah sat with her arm around her brother, her cheek resting against the top of his head. And she didn't look guarded or angry or afraid. She looked like a child. For the first time in 2 years, she looked like a child. Clara noticed. She turned away so Hannah wouldn't see her cry. That evening, after supper, after the dishes, after Caleb's bath and bedtime story, a story he insisted Clara tell, about a woman who crossed a desert with nothing but a satchel and won a war with paper. Clara sat on the porch. Ethan brought coffee, 2 cups. He sat beside her in the chair that had become his chair, the same way the kitchen table had become their war room, and the hallway had become the place where Clara checked on Caleb every night. The house had become theirs, not his, not hers. Theirs. Rain's coming, Ethan said. Clara looked at him. Doc Ellsworth says he can feel it in his bad knee. Storm moving in from the west. Maybe 2 days out. If it rains, the creek comes back. If it rains, we survive the summer. They sat with that for a moment. The weight of it. Months of drought and fear and fighting. And now, the possibility, just the possibility, of relief. Ethan? Yeah? That thing you were going to tell me, weeks ago, when you said it wasn't the right time? He went still. I remember, he said. Is it the right time now? He set his coffee down. He turned to face her. His hands, those big, rough, capable hands that had built fences and carried children and gripped hers on this porch the night before the hearing, were steady. I didn't marry you because I needed help with the ranch, he said. I told myself that. I told you that. But it wasn't true. Then why? Because I saw you on that platform, and you were standing there with nothing. Nothing, Clara. And you looked that woman in the eye and refused to break. And I thought, that's the strongest person I've ever seen. And I thought, if I don't ask her right now, she's going to walk down that road and disappear. And I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to speak. Clara's breath caught. It wasn't partnership, he said. It wasn't strategy. It was the first time in 2 years I felt something besides grief. And it scared the hell out of me. It scared you. It still scares me. Why? Because you could leave. Any time. You could take that satchel and those papers and that brain of yours and walk out that door and build a life anywhere. You don't need this ranch. You don't need this valley. You don't need me. Clara set her coffee down. You're right, she said. I don't need you. His face fell. I choose you, she said. That's different. That's better. He looked at her. She looked at him. The space between them was 12 inches of porch air, and 2 years of grief, and 1 summer of fighting, and the particular, terrifying, irreversible weight of 2 people deciding at the same moment to stop surviving and start living. Ethan reached out and took her hand. Not like the night before the hearing, not gripping, not desperate, gentle. His thumb traced the back of her hand, across the knuckles, across the small scars from 3 weeks of ranch work she'd never done before. Clara Callahan, he said. Ethan Callahan, she said back. He leaned toward her, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. The kiss was quiet, brief, not the dramatic collision of 2 people consumed by passion. The careful, deliberate press of 2 people who understood that what they were building was fragile and precious and worth protecting. When they pulled apart, Clara's eyes were closed. That was worth waiting for, she whispered. Yeah, he said. It was. From inside the house, a small voice called out. Did they kiss? Hannah, did they kiss? Shut up, Caleb. They kissed. I knew it. Go to sleep. I can't sleep. There's kissing. Clara dropped her head and laughed. A real laugh, full and warm and shaking. Ethan laughed too. That rough, reluctant sound that she'd learned to love, that came out of him like something he'd forgotten he was capable of. Through the window, she heard Hannah's voice. Quieter now, not talking to Caleb, talking to herself. Finally, the girl whispered. Clara heard it. She pressed her hand against her chest and held the word there. Finally. 2 days later, it rained. Not a drizzle, not a tease. A full, soaking, 3-day downpour that turned the creek back into a river and filled the water troughs and washed the dust off everything: the house, the barn, the road, the valley, and somehow, impossibly, the people in it. Clara stood in the yard and let it soak through her dress, her hair, her skin. Caleb ran in circles, screaming with joy. Hannah stood on the porch and turned her face up to the sky, with her eyes closed and her arms at her sides, and she looked so much like her mother in that moment that Ethan had to turn away. But Clara saw, and she didn't turn away. She walked to the porch and stood beside Hannah and said nothing. Just stood there, in the rain, next to a girl who was learning, slowly, painfully, stubbornly, to let someone in. Hannah opened her eyes. "Clara?" "Yeah. I'm glad you didn't get on that train." Clara's throat closed. "Me too, sweetheart." Hannah reached out and took her hand. They stood there together while the rain fell and the creek rose and the valley came back to life around them. That evening, Clara sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd read Ethan's papers, where she'd built the case against Boone, where Hannah had found the tax record, where Caleb had spilled ink and declared himself the official helper. She opened the satchel one last time. Inside were all the documents, the letters, the timeline, the evidence. She closed it and set it on the shelf by the door. She wouldn't need it again until September, and when September came, she'd be ready. Ethan walked in. He looked at the satchel on the shelf, then at Clara. "Done for the night?" "Done for the night." He sat down across from her, the lamp between them, the kitchen quiet, rain tapping on the roof. "You know what you did, don't you?" he said. "I did a lot of things. You'll have to be specific." "You saved this ranch. You saved those kids. You saved me. And you did it all in a month, starting with 23 cents and a borrowed horse." "The horse wasn't borrowed. I used it without asking. That's different." He smiled. That full, real smile she'd only seen twice. The one that changed his whole face. The one that made him look like the man he'd been before grief had cut him down. "Clara." "Yeah?" "Welcome home." She looked at him across the table. This man who'd asked a stranger to marry him on a train platform. This man who'd given her a door that locked from the inside. This man who'd held her hand on a dark porch and told her the truth about why he'd spoken that day. "I've been home," she said, "since the minute you took off your hat." He reached across the table and took her hand. Outside, the rain kept falling. The creek kept rising. And somewhere, in a small bedroom down the hall, a 6-year-old boy slept through the whole night without a single nightmare. For the first time in 2 years. Clara Whitmore arrived in Red Hollow with 23 cents and a crumpled train ticket. Clara Callahan stayed with a satchel full of evidence, a daughter who'd stopped fighting, a son who'd stopped being afraid, and a man who'd learned that love doesn't arrive like lightning. It grows like something stubborn enough to survive the heat.